It was every parent's worst nightmare. A cold October night in Union, South Carolina. A young mother, trembling, her eyes swollen from tears, stands before a crowd of cameras. Her voice cracks as she pleads, "Please, bring my babies back." Behind her, the words "missing children" flash across the screen. Two faces, Michael, 3 years old, and Alex, just 14 months, fill the airwaves of every American home. The nation stops. Mothers clutch their children tighter. Fathers turn up the TV volume. The story feels too cruel, too close. Susan Smith tells police that a man, black, tall, wearing a dark jacket, had forced her out of her car at an intersection and driven away with her son still strapped in the back seat. She says she screamed until her throat went dry, ran through the dark road, but the car disappeared into the night. For the next 9 days, America joins her grief. Volunteers search through fields, dive into lakes, hold candlelight vigils. Susan appears on every channel, crying, shaking, praying, her voice breaking with each syllable. "They're all I have. Please, please bring them home." She hugs the teddy bears left at the memorial. She sobs on camera. She becomes the symbol of every mother's pain. But somewhere in the background, detectives begin to notice small things that don't fit. The street she described doesn't have a stoplight. No witnesses saw the alleged carjacker. And Susan's eyes, though filled with tears, sometimes seem empty. When the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't come with screams but with silence. Her children were never taken. The car was never stolen. It was Susan who drove them to the edge of John D. Long Lake, put the car in neutral, and watched it roll slowly into the black water, her son still alive inside. The nation that cried for her would soon curse her name. Because sometimes, evil doesn't come from hate. It comes from love twisted, broken, and desperate to be seen. Before she became a headline, before her name became synonymous with deceit, Susan Lee Vaughn Smith was just another girl in the small town of Union, South Carolina, a place where everyone knew everyone, where the church bells marked time, and life moved with quiet predictability. But beneath that stillness was a girl who had never truly known peace. Susan was born in 1971. When she was barely a teenager, her father, depressed and defeated, ended his life with her. It was the first fracture in a life that would later shatter completely. Her mother remarried soon after, and Susan tried to fit into the picture of a new family. But something had already gone missing inside her. Behind her polite smile, there was loneliness, the kind that grows in silence and festers in the dark. At 17, Susan's world tilted again. She confided that her stepfather, a man she was supposed to trust, had crossed boundaries no parent ever should. The experience left her broken, torn between shame and denial, between the desire to be loved and the terror of being touched. She learned to hide pain behind composure, to disguise fear as normalcy. When she met David Smith, a young man from the same town, Susan thought she had finally found what she'd been searching for: stability, affection, a family she could call her own. They married quickly, perhaps too quickly. 2 sons came along, Michael and Alex, and for a moment, her world seemed whole again. Photographs from that time show her smiling, holding the boys close, sunlight touching her hair. But the camera doesn't capture exhaustion, depression, or the silent fights that echoed through their modest home. David worked long hours at the local textile plant. Money was tight. Their marriage, once warm, grew cold. Accusations of infidelity circled both ways. Susan began to feel trapped, a mother in her early 20s, still haunted by a past she couldn't outrun. And then came Tom Findlay Handsome, wealthy, the son of the company's owner. He was everything David was not: educated, composed, unattainable. For Susan, he was a glimpse into the life she thought she deserved. She fell hard, perhaps not for the man himself, but for what he represented: acceptance, escape, and validation. But Tom was clear. He liked her, yes, but not her baggage. And in Susan's eyes, her baggage was her 2 young boys. Letters and diary entries later revealed her obsession with being loved, her fear of abandonment, and her growing belief that her children were the reason she was unworthy of happiness. On the outside, Susan Smith was a mother doing her best. On the inside, she was a woman unraveling, caught between guilt and desire, between maternal instinct and emotional emptiness. In those final days before the night of the 25th of October 1994, she seemed calm, too calm. She dropped her children at daycare, smiled at the neighbors, and drove past the lake without looking. No one noticed the distance in her eyes, or the way her hands lingered on the steering wheel a second too long. No one knew that a storm was building quiet, invisible, and ready to consume everything she had left. And in a few nights, that storm would find its release, not in anger, but in the quiet pull of gravity and water. The night of the 25th of October 1994 settled over Union, South Carolina, like a soft blanket, the kind of night where fog clings to the road and the air feels heavier than usual. Inside her small red Ford Tempo, Susan Smith sat with her two sons, Michael, just 3 years old, and Alex, barely 14 months. The boys had drifted to sleep in their car seats, their breaths light, unaware that their mother's mind was no longer steady. Susan had driven aimlessly for nearly an hour, looping through back roads, chasing thoughts she couldn't silence. The weight of rejection from Tom Finley's final letter echoed in her head. I care for you, but I can't build a life with children that aren't mine. To him, it was an honest confession. To her, it was the final crack in a mind already splitting apart. She drove past John D. Long Lake, a small, still body of water, invisible in the darkness except for the faint shimmer of moonlight. She slowed down, staring at the black reflection of the sky. The road was empty, quiet, almost too quiet. She pulled over near the boat ramp and turned off the engine. For a long moment, she sat there frozen, shaking, her fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. Behind her, little Michael stirred and murmured, "Mommy?" She turned, eyes wet, forcing a smile that trembled. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. But nothing was okay. In the following minutes, everything that defined her motherhood, morality, sanity would dissolve into that dark water. She stepped out of the car, walked around to the back, and stared into the shadows. The cool air stung her face. She hesitated. Then she walked back, got inside, shifted the car into neutral, and released the brake. The Ford began to roll. At first, slowly, the tires crunching over gravel, the sound of water lapping against metal. Then, faster as gravity took over. Michael's voice cried out, "Mama!" And for a fleeting second, Susan reached for the door handle, as if she might stop it, but she didn't. She sat there, watching the taillights fade beneath the surface until the red glow disappeared completely. The lake rippled once, then went still. The night swallowed everything. She stood at the water's edge for several minutes, her reflection trembling on the surface. In that moment, silence was deafening. No sirens, no screams. Just the wind brushing past her, carrying away the last sound of her children's voices. Then she composed herself. She wiped her tears, got back into her car, and drove away as if she could outrun what she had done. By the time she reached a neighbor's house, she was sobbing, frantic, spinning a story that would grip an entire nation. "There was a man," she cried. "He had a gun. He took my car. My babies are inside." Police arrived within minutes. They surrounded the area, took her statement, and broadcasted an alert across the state. Within hours, news stations reported 2 children carjacking desperate mother pleads for help. As dawn rose, helicopters hovered above the lake, search teams swept the woods, and reporters began gathering outside her house. Susan played her part flawlessly, shaking, crying, collapsing into the arms of officers. She described the black man who had supposedly hijacked her car in chilling detail. 6 feet tall, dark jacket, knit cap. The story spread like wildfire. Strangers lit candles. Families prayed. America united in grief. And Susan Smith became the face of tragedy, a young mother wronged, broken, and begging for mercy. But for every tear she shed, a secret weighed heavier beneath that lake, a secret waiting for daylight, and the truth it could no longer hide. 9 days, 9 long days would pass before that silence finally spoke back. For 9 days, Union County became the stage of a tragedy that America couldn't turn away from. Volunteers combed through forest, divers searched murky waters, helicopters scanned fields that stretched for miles. At the center of it all stood Susan Smith, a mother who cried for the cameras, who held up pictures of her sons and whispered their names as though she could summon them back through sheer grief. Her voice broke in televised interviews. "I can't sleep. I can't eat. I just want my babies back." Every tear looked genuine. Every sob felt real. America believed her. But inside the Union County Sheriff's Office, a different picture was forming. Investigators had gone back to the intersection where she claimed the carjacking took place, a narrow road with no stoplight, no witnesses, no security cameras. The story didn't line up, and Susan's details changed every time she retold it. The man's height, his clothes, the direction he ran. Detectives began to sense something deeper, not malice, but manipulation. They studied her behavior during interviews, her lack of eye contact when describing the kidnapper, the way she cried without tears, the moments she looked almost relieved when the cameras were off. Meanwhile, they were gathering data quietly. No tire marks where she said the car had been taken. No footprints matching her description. No evidence of forced entry or violence. Then came the first break. A witness had seen her car that night not being stolen, but driving toward John D. Long Lake. Detective David Caldwell, a man known for his calm persistence, decided to test a theory. During one interview, he asked her to retrace her route that night. She agreed, nervous but composed. But when they neared the lake, her hands began to tremble. She couldn't remember which way she had turned. Her breathing quickened. Caldwell took note. By the fifth day, Susan's story was full of holes. The police held press conferences, urging the kidnapper to come forward. Behind closed doors, though, they were convinced there was no kidnapper at all. They began to press harder. One detective, trying to read her, said quietly, "Susan, you seem tired. Maybe it's time to tell us what really happened." She broke down, then composed herself again. "You think I could hurt my own babies?" she screamed. "I love them." But guilt was already seeping through the cracks. On November 3rd, Susan was brought in again, this time without her lawyer. Caldwell sat across from her, his tone soft, almost kind. He didn't accuse, he didn't raise his voice. He just asked her to start from the beginning. One more time. For hours, she talked. About her marriage, about Tom Finley, about how everything had fallen apart. Her words slowed, her sentences tangled, and then came a pause, long, heavy, suffocating. Caldwell waited. Finally, her voice broke. "My babies are not okay," she whispered. Then, through tears, "It wasn't a man. Nobody took them. The car is in the lake." That was all he needed. The next morning, divers returned to John D. Long Lake. The sun had barely risen when a crane lifted the Ford Tempo from the depths. The scene was silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Inside the car were two still buckled into their seats, untouched by time but frozen in horror. Susan stood nearby, wrapped in a police blanket, her face pale and empty. She didn't cry this time. She just watched the car emerge, the lake's black water dripping from the windows like tears. The town that had once prayed for her now turned on her with fury and disbelief. The same cameras that had captured her sobbing pleas now captured her mugshot. The story that began as a tragedy had become something far darker, a mirror reflecting how easily empathy could be weaponized. And as investigators pieced together the motives, the letters, and the twisted logic of a desperate mind, one truth remained inescapable. The monster America had been hunting didn't come from the shadows. She had been standing in the spotlight all along. The trial of Susan Smith began in the summer of 1995, but in truth, her verdict had already been written long before the jury was sworn in. The moment the truth surfaced, the moment the car was pulled from the dark lake, America's sympathy turned to rage. The same faces that had once lit candles for her now spat her name through clenched teeth. Outside the Union County Courthouse, crowds gathered every day, holding signs that read "Justice for Michael and Alex" and "Baby." Reporters lined the steps, microphones ready, cameras flashing like 1,000 accusations. Inside, the courtroom was heavy with silence. Every seat was filled. Every breath felt like it might break. When Susan entered, shackled, wearing a plain blue sweater, the air seemed to thicken. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, but her eyes carried the same hollow distance that had haunted detectives from the beginning. The prosecution painted her as a manipulative woman, consumed by vanity and obsession. They played the televised clips of her crying on national television, pausing on her trembling lips and wet cheeks. Then, they displayed the letter from Tom Finley, where he ended their relationship and made clear he wanted no part in a ready-made family. Their argument was merciless. She to start a new life, a life without them. Jurors sat frozen as photos of the lake, the car, and car seats were projected onto the courtroom wall. Gasps rippled through the room. Some people cried openly. The defense, led by David Bruck, took a different approach. They did not deny what she had done, they tried to explain why. He spoke of her childhood trauma, of the father who took his own, of the stepfather who violated her trust, of the depression that went untreated, and the emotional instability that grew in silence. Bruck argued that Susan didn't act out of hatred. but from a distorted desperation, a storm of mental illness and heartbreak that clouded reason. For 3 weeks, the courtroom balanced on a knife's edge between pity and fury. When Susan took the stand, her voice was faint, almost childlike. She said she didn't plan to kill it, she just wanted to disappear with them, to end her pain, to make the world stop spinning. "I was lost," she said softly, "and I thought if we were gone, the pain would stop too." But no words could undo the image of two tiny pulled from a lake. When the verdict came, the courtroom stood still. Guilty of murder. The judge, eyes steady but weary, delivered the sentence. Life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The death penalty was spared, but the public's judgment was not. Outside, the crowd erupted not in celebration, but in bitter satisfaction. Justice had been done, they said. But as reporters asked grieving family members for comment, one of Susan's relatives whispered, "There's no justice here. The babies are still gone." In the weeks that followed, the media dissected every detail of her life. Talk shows debated whether Susan was a monster or a victim of her own damaged mind. Psychologists argued over her diagnosis, religious leaders preached about evil hiding behind innocence, and true crime headlines turned her into a modern parable, a warning wrapped in tragedy. Inside her cell at Leith Correctional Institution, Susan's days blurred into routine. Letters poured in, some from strangers condemning her, others from people who wrote to say they forgave her. In interviews, she still insisted she loved her children. "I didn't want them to die," she told a reporter. "I just didn't know how to live." As of 2025, Susan Smith remains behind bars, having served more than 3 decades of her sentence. In recent years, talk of potential parole has resurfaced, each mention reigniting public anger, each headline reopening an old wound. For most, forgiveness feels impossible. Because this wasn't just a crime against 2 children, it was a betrayal of the purest kind of trust the world knows, a mother's love. And that is why, even after 30 years, the name Susan Smith still carries a chill. The lake is still. 30 years later, the water at John D. Long Lake reflects the same calm sky, as if nothing had ever happened there. But those who live nearby will tell you the air changes when you stand at the edge. It feels heavier, as if the lake remembers. There's no sound except the soft lap of water against stone. Somewhere beneath that reflection lies the memory of a mother's hands letting go of a car sliding forward into blackness, of a night that never really ended. In Union, time moved on. The searchlights faded, the news crews packed up, and the crowds outside the courthouse disappeared. But for those who watched it unfold, the divers, the officers, the townspeople who once prayed for her, the story never truly left. They still remember the feeling of being deceived, of realizing that the tears they had believed were a lie. Psychologists would later call it the Susan Smith effect, the collective trauma of misplaced empathy, when compassion for a victim turns into disbelief and shame. It changed how police, media, and the public approached every similar story that came after. When a parent cries on TV now, there's always a flicker of doubt behind every sympathetic headline. Inside the prison walls, Susan remains a contradiction, a symbol of evil to some, a case study of mental collapse to others. She's written letters to reporters, sometimes apologizing, sometimes explaining, sometimes denying. Her words vary, but one line reappears again and again. "I still see their faces. I still dream of water." There's no closure in this story, no clean ending. Just echoes, the echo of a mother's sobs, the echo of a nation's outrage, the echo of 2 small boys who never had a chance to grow up. The tragedy of Susan Smith isn't only in what she did, but in what she destroyed. The universal trust that a mother would rather harm her children. She broke something that words like justice can't repair. And yet, beneath the horror, there's a deeper ache, the realization that Susan wasn't born a monster. She was made by neglect, by silence, by wounds that were never treated, and love that was never stable. Sometimes, the most frightening crimes aren't driven by hate, but by emptiness, the kind that grows slowly, invisibly, until it swallows everything it touches. As the camera fades to black, imagine the lake again quiet, vast, indifferent. The world above has moved on. The water below never forgets. Because in every reflection, somewhere in that darkness, you can still hear the whisper of her sons calling out, "Mommy?" And this time, there's no answer.